This video is going to be everything you need to succeed in software. This is going to be a summary of everything I've learned in the last 10 years of my career working in tech, software engineering, and creating content here on YouTube for now over 10 years. So we're going to start off with the most important one, and this is really to start talking about your mindset. You might think skill and career development is the most important thing, but the mindset is the foundation for all of it. So the most important thing here is to have a desire to get better. So if you're interviewing for software engineering roles and they do not get the impression that you have a desire to get better, then bringing you into the team is a more risky move because now they can only judge your abilities based off of your skill. And even if you're very good at skill, meaning you can develop, you're really good at the technical interviews, you know how to build products, but you don't have the desire to make things better and constantly improve, then you're going to really slow down the progress of the team. So this, in my opinion, is the most important thing. You might be overwhelmed with all of the technical skills and all the stuff you have to do to prepare for interviews, but the foundation for all of it is a desire to do those things and get better. If you have that, you're already most of the way there. Now we're going to talk about skill. So we're not just going to say, oh, the skill's not important. That is huge, and that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about in this video. But I just want to set the foundation. If you're always in the state of wanting to get better, you're going to get better much quicker and have a much better time in this journey. So for example, I have gotten job offers where I'm working in a new stack, so all new tech that I'm not familiar with, and also completely new industries. So brand new domain knowledge that I have to learn all about. From the outside, if somebody's brand new to the technology and they have no idea how the industry works, they would seem like a pretty bad hire. But in the interviews that people have had with me, I make it very clear that I have a strong desire to conquer both of these things and that these are not going to slow me down. And I might actually be a better hire than somebody who does have some experience in these, but they're stagnant in their progress. So basically saying, hey, I'm willing to invest in conquering these things. I'm not going to let my lack of knowledge on the technology or lack of knowledge on the industry slow me down. In fact, I'm going to put in the extra work to make sure I understand these things. And in exchange, you give me an opportunity that, hey, maybe at first glance, I'm not a 100% perfect fit for that position, but I'm compensating with desire and I trust that I'm going to be able to figure these things out because I have all of the core software engineering skills and abilities. So really, these are just implementation details. I've built experience in other stacks and in other industries without any issue. So what does that mean practically? It means that I go into new projects with a very high level of confidence that I'm going to be able to do whatever it is that is asked of me. Even if I don't know the answer right away, I'm very resourceful to either do the research to figure it out, find somebody who does know how to do it, and ultimately I've convinced myself that I can do anything that I set my mind to. So with that foundation, always wanting to improve, how do you actually do that? Well, this comes down to confidence and ego. And these are two words that feel similar, but I want to talk about how they're different. So confidence is what you want to have a lot of, but most people have low confidence. This means they're unwilling to go out of their comfort zone. They're unwilling to propose new solutions. They have not convinced themselves that they can solve certain problems or achieve certain results. And as a result, they can't give that confidence to potential employers, customers, whatever it might be. However, the problem is a lot of people have really big egos. And an ego will prevent you from getting better because you're unwilling to ask questions that might make you look dumb, or you're unwilling to admit that you don't know the answer to something. So this is the typical way people go about life. They have a very low level of confidence. They struggle with things like imposter syndrome, but they have such a high ego that they're unwilling to ask for help or actually admit that they need something outside of themselves to get better, whether that's help from someone else or doing additional research, whatever it might be. So what I suggest is actually trying to flip these. So bring your confidence high. Believe in yourself that you can achieve results, you can learn what you need to do, and you do have the ability to propose alternative solutions or ideas, and that's fine. Maybe those ideas are bad or maybe they get shut down, but that's fine because you generally have a low ego. I'm totally comfortable being the dumbest person in the room. I usually am, and I'm okay asking a question that makes me feel stupid because I know that's the fastest way to learn. And the thing is, if you do that enough, eventually you're not asking dumb questions because you've learned more than most people, where they're not asking those dumb questions. They're unwilling to put themselves out of their comfort zone because their ego's too high, they're worried they might look stupid or something like that. Software engineering is a career of learning and discovery. If you're going to be getting into software engineering, you're constantly going to be learning new things and finding that you don't know the answer to a lot of these questions you might have. So when you're building software, it's a matter of continually working through problems and finding the answer to different challenges. That being said, the upkeep to basically continue learning and staying up to date with the industry is not a full-time effort. There might be some initial effort up front to become good at software development, learn different technologies out there and different programming principles, but once you have that stuff locked in, you're not going to have to continually study full time to be able to stay up to date with technology. I think people assume you're going to have to spend 8 hours a day for the rest of eternity just learning new stuff. When I tell people that, hey, I believe you can keep up with technology with an hour a day if you stay focused. These are just some example numbers, and we'll get into this idea in more detail here soon. But the idea behind this is that you invest an initial upfront amount of time and effort to learn the skills. But once you have those, you can stay up to date and continually learn new skills with a relatively low amount of effort per day. You don't have to learn everything. And in fact, I tell people, do not learn everything, because software is infinitely vast. There's unlimited programming languages and technologies and cloud providers and just different approaches to developing. You'll never learn everything. So if you try to learn everything, you're probably not going to be very effective in your studies. So instead of spending all of your time just learning, use really focused time to learn and learn the stuff that actually matters for progress in what you're trying to achieve. You can think of learning similar to how you develop software. You might have an initial commit of code, then you make some changes, you continue, you make some changes, and this process goes on indefinitely. So you can look at this as change to some software over time, and if you want to look at any point in time what that software is doing, you usually don't just look at the full snapshot of the software. Instead, you compare. So you get the diff between these 2 points in time. Because there might just be a really small change. Let's say we just add 30 lines of code. You don't necessarily need to know all the other thousands of lines of code to understand that change. This is the same way I like to approach learning. So this is your starting knowledge. And then let's say you learn some language. We'll just say, hey, we spent some time, we learned Python. Great way to get started. Lots of people start with Python. But later down the road, you need to learn something else. Maybe you need to learn JavaScript. The language here is not that important. The point here is that, you have to go from one language to another language. Well, instead of just having the full language basically memorized in your brain, you can actually focus on what are the differences between these. If we just focus on the differences, then we basically have a language we think in, and then a language that's different in a few different ways. That's why people say it's quite difficult to learn your first programming language, but learning the next programming language is a lot easier because you have things to compare it against. And as a result, the initial effort to learn is quite high, but then as you get better, the amount of time you have to spend learning becomes less because you've built such a strong foundation of things to compare against that learning new material is quite easy. So for example, you might learn about some new database and think, oh, hey, this is actually really similar to this other database I use in terms of how it structures data. The only difference is blank, where that blank is the key thing that helps you learn much quicker. So that's really an overview of my approach to mindset and learning. There is a ton more to that, but I think the biggest thing, again, is having a desire to learn and get better, and then ultimately consistently getting better over time. It takes time to learn new ideas, but once you have them locked in pretty well, learning new ideas that are relatively similar is not a huge lift. So you can get better a lot quicker as you get better. So again, the effort might look like this, but the results might look like this. Where as you get better, you can get more and more results, but the effort to get those results goes down. So now let's talk about a very important thing, which is skill development. Yes, mindset is the foundation. It's critical, but if you have all the mindset in the world, but you don't know how to develop or build anything, you're not going to get very far. Let's first talk about consistent efforts. So I mentioned briefly the idea of instead of studying for 8 hours a day, just studying for 1 hour a day. And on the surface, this might be like, what? Why would 1 hour a day be more effective than studying 8 hours a day? And at first, this might not make sense. Like, oh yeah, 1 hour a day is going to be more effective than 8 hours a day? Yeah, sure. Well, 8 hours a day might get you more total output, but the result per hour of 1 hour per day is going to be much higher. So again, with these graphs, let's say this is time, and we'll say this is progress. Each hour of the day, the amount of progress you make starts to decline. So by the end of the day, you've already put in a full day of studying. You're not going to get as much out in terms of progress for each hour you invest. The most valuable is that first hour, or the first 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it might be. So for me, it's better to do less hours and do it more frequently. You could follow the same principle with more time per day, but I think a very important first step is to set a minimum. You can say, hey, I'm going to study for 1 hour per day minimum. You can always do more, but we're going to hit at least an hour. This translates to 365 hours in a year of studying, which is the equivalent of 9 weeks of full-time work. That's a substantial amount of time, plus every single one of those hours that you're investing is very high focus. You're going to get really, really good results. Now, when I tell people this, I'm usually talking about the minimum amount of time you should put into your goals per day. But you can do more. Most people do have more than just an hour available. But even if you have multiple hours per day, I typically recommend that you'll do an hour of a certain thing per day. So we have 1 hour per day. I like to invest this in something that I want to get better at over time, but doesn't have an immediate effect on my day-to-day work. So I'll give you some examples. This could be data structures and algorithms. It could be system design. It could be new technology. So basically spending 1 hour per day trying some new tech that you haven't tried before. It doesn't have to be new to the world, but it could just be new to you. It could be advanced topics. Maybe there are certain things you've always kind of wanted to know, but you've just avoided it and you've never really needed it for your day-to-day work. Maybe that's asynchronous programming, for example. Or you've always wanted to learn how real-time applications work. Basically going deeper in your studies for that hour. You could also take this idea and do things other than coding. So for example, it could be networking. But generally, I don't recommend you do all of these, like 1 hour for each of these. I would just pick 1 or 2. So maybe you say, hey, every day I'm going to spend an hour studying system design, and I'm going to spend an hour networking. To me, this is a solid strategy. It takes 2 hours a day, but you're going to get really, really good results over time. If you ever get a chance to talk to a really good software developer, it seems like they just know more things. They know how to solve problems. They're just better. And they're better because they've experienced a lot of problems, they've built a lot of solutions, and they just have a much stronger skill set. Doing this is like investing because you spend the hour now, but in the long run, it's going to save you hours of effort because you're a better developer in general. I've followed this strategy for a lot of periods in my life. I've never been perfect 1 hour a day for my entire life, but there are certain periods of my life where I've applied this 1 hour a day to a certain topic. And I can tell you just from experience, it's one of the most effective ways to get better. So I'll go through a few examples where I've applied this and it has been very helpful to me. The first one, in college, I spent an hour a day before classes started studying the C programming language. Why? I don't know. I had one class that used some C. It really didn't get in a ton of depth, but I wanted to go deeper and just have that really solid foundation for software engineering. So what I did is I picked up a book on C programming and I worked through the exercises in that book every single morning for an hour. And the book was a little intimidating at first, but turns out I actually finished the book. That's crazy because, up until that point, I would just kind of work on something for a little bit, jump to some new topic, and I'd never really go deep enough to get better. Well, that book helped build the foundation for some of my programming abilities, especially taking what I learned from the book and applying it so I'd actually code out the examples. And from that was birthed my C programming course here on YouTube, which, has been one of my more popular topics. Lots of people have benefited from that because I put in that effort for people. There's really no excuse to not be able to do this 1 hour a day thing, and that's why I like it. It's a small enough time that most people can fit it in their day, and even if you couldn't, you could do 30 minutes and still get a lot of the same benefits. But yeah, I was able to put in an hour a day. I was a full-time student. I also worked, so no excuses here. You just have to find the time to make it happen. I continued this idea, and during work, when I was working full-time, I was at IBM doing some stuff that really had nothing to do with C programming, but I spent a lot of my time studying C programming, trying to get that hour a day. I was a little bit less consistent, but I knew that learning that material helped me be just better. Even if it wasn't something that was due that day, it was a skill that I was building to just become a better developer, a better technical person, studying new topics, learning new challenging things, and being exposed to new ideas. So I bet you, many of you watching this, if you have a job, there might be some opportunity to squeeze in some study time, whether that's on the clock or during lunch break. You'd be surprised that a lot of companies actually support their employees doing general studying and upskilling. You should try to do that if you can. Then you don't have to take an additional hour out of your day. You can just squeeze it in during your lunch break or during work hours. Right now, I'm doing this with system design. If you've been watching my videos lately, you probably have noticed I've posted a lot of system design topics. And this is all based off of studying the topic for an hour a day. For me, that's working through some books and some specific websites that I've found very helpful, implementing some of these ideas in AWS, or trying to go a little bit deeper and studying some of the white papers for some of the different system design ideas. So for example, spending an hour of your day studying the Cassandra database, how that works, how that's different than some of the other databases out there. Hey, maybe I'll even try to set up an instance of it, see how that works. What topic you focus on, I would say that really depends on where you are in your journey. If you're a beginner, it might just be spending an hour studying new programming principles. If a lot of programming topics are still brand new to you, then yeah, just spend that hour to get better at these different programming concepts you may have not used before. Become familiar with things like generics or templates. Maybe try functional programming, being comfortable with recursion. Understanding different design patterns, understanding different data types and how they're different, understanding different bases for numbers, binary versus octal versus hexadecimal versus plain old decimal. What does all that mean? These are just some different topic ideas. If all of that sounds really comfortable and familiar to you, then maybe you go even deeper, look into asynchronous programming. That's a really great place to start. Or maybe try some new languages that have different paradigms. Try functional languages, or try something like Rust with really strict compiling rules. Maybe try C or some of these older languages that really set the foundation for some of the other programming languages. Or maybe learn about AWS, something that is probably pretty important if you want to get into back-end engineering or web development, but it's something that's pretty overwhelming, so spending an hour a day on it can be really helpful. Now, if you're really looking to get into a job, then you might want to spend that time on data structures and algorithms or system design. And if you're really just trying to land some interviews, spend that time on networking. Now let's talk about your programming language of choice. So when you're just starting out in software, you might be reading articles, watching videos, or just hearing from people that, hey, you should learn Python for some data science stuff, or maybe learn JavaScript and build some websites, or C++ to build some games. And then you just spend so much time watching all these videos and trying to decide the perfect tool when you're a complete newbie. You know nothing. Effectively, as a developer, you're useless. So what does that mean practically? The programming language of choice probably doesn't matter that much. If you're trying to learn your first programming language, you should be able to pick it in maybe a few hours of just reading on the internet, different programming languages for different purposes. Pick one of them because learning the first one, that's where you learn a lot of the different programming principles, but learning the second one is probably going to take you 1/10 the time. Here's some general advice. If you don't have any idea what you want to do in software and you're open to anything, a great one to start out with is Python. And I say that because it introduces the least amount of syntactical friction to build your ideas in code. Whereas if you go with something that's very heavy on the syntax, it's going to take a little bit more time to digest. So that's a really great way to just get started and learn some programming principles. Plus, a lot of things like data structures and algorithms often have implementation examples in Python. But if you actually do have somewhere you want to go in your tech career, then I would be maybe a little bit more specific on what language to learn, and I would do that by career outcome. So there's some very clear, obvious choices. If you want to build iPhone apps, you might go for Swift. If you want to build games, you might build with C++. If you want to do data analytics, you might choose Python. So you can just look up the kind of thing you want to do in your career, figure out what is the general recommended programming language. There might be a few options. So the summary here is just pick one and start learning. You could spend the rest of your life trying to decide what programming language to start with, and it's probably just a waste of time. You're not to the point where you actually have enough knowledge to be able to make good decisions about what language to learn anyways. So just start, and then you'll be able to make those kinds of decisions and thoughts much better later on. The next thing, and this is just another reason of why you shouldn't stress too much about which programming language to start with, is because you should be focused on solving problems, not the programming language. You should think of the programming language as the tool or the input to solve a problem, and you should always use the best tool. However, it's sometimes the case that there's not a perfect language to solve a problem, and you could achieve it with different languages, just depending on what you're trying to do. So instead, start with the problem. This is really our job. We get paid to solve problems. So if we have some problem, we usually solve it with a programming language or various tools, maybe database or whatever it might be. And that is how you should approach learning software development. You don't just learn Python for the sake of learning Python. You learn it to do something with it. So what are you trying to do? And the thing here is if you can find a problem and figure out how to solve it with a programming language, you have the ability to make a lot of money, either with your own product or as an employee or a contractor for some company that's solving problems for customers. And the better you are at solving problems, the more you can demand, the more freedom you have to work on the things that interest you. So because of this, you want to approach development from a product point of view and from a customer point of view. What actual product features do you need to solve certain problems? And are those the kinds of things that customers are going to want in the software? So look at the big picture. Things like user experience is very important with software, even if you're a back-end developer, because we're ultimately trying to provide solutions to people. So if you go into development with this approach, you're going to be much more valuable because you understand why you're building software. And that's a really big part of it. If you're just good at code, but you don't know how to turn that code into solutions that are valuable for customers, then you're probably not going to be as valuable as you could be. That approach should help you build better software. You start by thinking, what does the software need to do? How does the user interact with it? Then, what tools do I have to make that experience as easy as possible to build and a very good solution to the customer's problem? That's your goal. That's what you need to figure out. So when building software, one of the first things I like to do is to talk about the requirements of the software. What are you actually trying to build? And I get it. You're not going to have it perfect from the get-go. That's fine. And that leads us to our next point, which is as you grow a product, you'll often need to have rewrites or redesigns. So you don't have to have your software perfect from day one. And if you try to engineer a solution that solves problems way in the future, you're going to over-engineer it, and you're never going to get to that first version released. Think about it like this. If you were to go back in time before cars existed, or even bicycles, let's say bicycles didn't even exist, and people were talking about getting from point A to point B faster. Yeah, we've been using horses, but maybe we could think of some other ways to do it. And you come in and you start to engineer an aircraft where basically, hey, we could fit tons of people on this aircraft, fly from one airport to the other. Yeah, it's a great idea, and maybe that works in the future when we have the foundation to build that. But right now, we're just trying to build a bicycle. So stop trying to engineer the final product when you're really just trying to get a prototype built. So build a prototype, and the ability to develop fast is important because we don't want the prototype to take too long to build. Typically, if a project goes longer than 3-6 months, the chances of it getting completed just go down to zero, basically. So we want to get a prototype or a beta version as quickly as possible, ultimately seeking to have an MVP, which is the minimum viable product, basically the bare minimum required for a product to be valuable and for customers to use it. We don't want to engineer the final solution from the beginning, and that is in two realms, with features as well as user count. It's often people are thinking of their app being a multi-million user app, and they engineer the backends for that to support that number of users. Well, that's going to, by default, give you a more complex system that takes longer to develop than to just start with something simple and get a prototype built. If you grow and your product is successful enough, you should then be able to make a profit, take money, reinvest in improving that product. You build, and then ultimately you have a pretty established product. You want to build an MVP that is functional and really good, very good user experience, but so many people try to build this. And then they wonder why the product never gets completed or it's just a nightmare. Well, it's because you're trying to solve the wrong problem. The problem that you're trying to solve should be to build a prototype to make sure the idea works and that people would use it. Then work towards an MVP so you can actually release something. Then scale the system as you get more users instead of trying to solve everybody's problem and everything you might ever encounter ever from the beginning. Now, obviously keep the end in mind, because if you're building software for an already very popular company that has tons of users, then you need to keep scale in mind. But if you're just starting and you're just trying to do something on your own, then you probably don't need to worry so much about performance and supporting millions of users because you have zero. Why would you care? Just get the prototype built. This is why I tell people who are getting started just to be careful when it comes to microservices. It's really common to build out like 50 little tiny microservices that all work together to solve some bigger problem, but then you just have this insanely complex architecture, and building anything on top of it is a nightmare. When you should just start out with a very simple monolith and just have a simple single product that you can run with. Then you can break out little services or whatever you need. So that's just my approach. And you obviously need to consider the end use case to some degree, but don't overthink it and build something that's so complicated that you can't actually complete the build. Next thing, and we're kind of shifting gears here, there are more than 5 tech companies in the world. So this one might be controversial because it might seem like I'm throwing a bunch of negativity at the really big tech companies, and that's not necessarily the case. But some people will say, oh, I haven't had any luck finding a job, or I'm just not getting through these interviews. But they have their eyes set on only landing in one of the top 5 or 10 tech companies, as if those are the only companies that exist that hire software developers, which is crazy. And I guess it's something like, hey, if I get in one of these companies, then I'm special. But are you really? Because a lot of these tech companies hire thousands of people. Perhaps there's smaller companies that is actually more impressive to get into because there's not nearly as many people. Just something to consider. And when it comes to applying to your first roles, you should totally consider all types of different companies. In fact, if you bring some of the attributes I've talked about, like the willingness to get better and improve and basically providing value through product development to companies, I would say you have a really strong shot at getting into smaller startups or medium-sized companies than shooting for the stars and getting into a really big tech company. Definitely nothing wrong with that, and you can totally do that. But the approaches in terms of how to get into these companies is different. We'll get into some of that, but if you're going for smaller companies, it's much more about your skills and the value you provide. If you get into the bigger companies, they're going to have a lot stronger screening process. So we're talking data structures and algorithms, system design, and things like that. So not only are there thousands of tech companies you're probably not considering when you're job searching, there are also tons of companies that are not tech companies that need technical people. Pretty much every established company out there has some software, so really any company is a possible job opportunity. So if you've exhausted the top 100 companies and then you're just like, oh, I'm done, then hey, you're doing it wrong. There's a ton of other opportunities out there. There are thousands and thousands of startups started every single day. I don't know the exact numbers, you can look them up, but way, way more than you're probably thinking. If you can't provide value to one of thousands of companies, then maybe the market isn't the problem. In other words, the problem might be you. But don't worry, by the end of this video, I'm going to give you a lot of different strategies to fix this problem. So keep watching because we're going to get into that. The main thing I need you to get from this point is that there's more opportunity out there than you can take on. If you're not getting any opportunities, then it's either you don't know how to find them or you're not providing value or communicating what value you'd provide. So those are some of the things we'll talk about in this video as well. My next tip to get better is to learn from those better than you. This one is huge. I cannot express how important this is. It's a mistake I made early on in my career. I took on very small roles where I didn't have a lot of mentorship or guidance. Yeah, this is definitely a way to get my foot in the door, start building apps, start experimenting and learning, but I had very few people there to tell me the proper way of doing things, and as a result, the process of learning was much slower than it needed to be. Here is an important rule to live by. at least with where most of you watching this are in your career, you never want to be the best in the room. And that applies for literally everybody except the person who is actually the best. The idea here, though, is you don't want to be the best in the room because that means you're not learning from anybody. So if you work in a team environment and you are the worst developer on the team, that's great because you can be the most improved. You have so much room for growth and you can learn from so many people. Ideally, you can find a few people who you really learn from. I did eventually in my early career find a few people that were helping me out with guidance, and I just made it a point to check in with them, but I didn't do it nearly as much as I should have. Looking back, I should have been more clear and say, hey, I want to learn from you. I want to get to where you are. Can you teach me what you did to get where you are? When I started, I wanted roles that gave me freedom, autonomy, me to use the tech that I chose, all of these things that would come with a senior level role. But I wanted that freedom and that level of control when I first started. And I paid a price for that because I had to find roles where I didn't have leadership to tell me what to do. So it wasn't a good trade. Looking back, I should have gotten into a role that maybe pushed me a little bit more, made me follow some other people who knew what they were doing, instead of being basically like the solo developer for a very small company. And this naturally leads me into my next point, which is to learn through diffusion. So say this is you, and these circles around you are the people you surround yourself with. So we're talking here in a professional setting. These are your colleagues or your managers, whatever it might be, the people you interact with and the people you strive to be like. These are basically the people you compare yourself to. If you exist here and you're not the smartest person or the most experienced in the room, you're naturally going to get some knowledge just from being around them and working with them. And to me, this is a win because we're talking about here 0% effort learning. Basically, just by surrounding yourself with these people, you're going to pick up new technologies, new terms, new skills, new experiences without really having to do a whole lot. Basically, all you have to do is whenever you get some insight from somebody who's more experienced than you, just apply it to your life. You learned from their mistakes and what they had to go through to learn those, but you didn't have to go through that issue yourself. So yeah, maybe it's not 0% effort because you still have to apply it to your life, but learning through diffusion, just being around people better than you, is one of the most effective ways to get better without feeling stressed about learning or getting better. You just are because of the environment you're in. Another great way to do this concept in your life is to find great creators online or resources that curate information and deliver it to you in a non-mentally taxing way. So podcast-like content, maybe these videos are fairly easy to watch for you. This isn't designed to be a replacement to direct learning. We're just talking about getting exposed to new ideas and the perspectives of people with experience so that you can get better without having to do everything on your own. Next up on my list, you have to understand that there is a cost to everything. But not only that, the cost can be measured in either dollars or time. When you are a beginner, you tend to only think about dollars. As you begin to improve, you start to worry more about time. So you might be talking to some senior engineer, looking for some guidance, and you might be thinking, oh yeah, it shouldn't be a huge ask to get some guidance and some mentoring from a senior engineer because it doesn't cost them anything. It's basically free for them to take time out of their day and help me. But that's the part where you miss, right? You're thinking about value in dollars. They're thinking about value in time. So actually helping you is not free. It costs a lot of time. And if somebody doesn't want to help you, it's because they don't want to spend the time. You're too expensive for what the benefit to them would be. So let this idea be a lesson to not waste people's time. If you ask for help from somebody, it should be a very small ask. And that's the idea of a mentor. They can help you find what to do. They can even help you figure out how to do something, but they do not do it. I made this mistake. That's why I'm teaching these things. When I first started out, there was a guy that was much more advanced than me, and I was regularly reaching out to him for help. This was very early in my career, but I didn't really have a strong mentor. I was kind of just going with the wind, whatever I felt was like the right direction to go. And I would ask for help, but the thing I was asking for was a very big effort on his part. So for example, I asked how to do a certain thing with an app I was building, but I didn't come to him with maybe things I've already tried or specific issues that I'm running into. So from his perspective, it's like, oh, I'm just coming to him to get free work, right? Like he's not getting anything out of this because it doesn't look like I'm putting in the effort. He did help out with that initial request. He actually ended up just building out an example and sending it to me, and I was able to use that as basically the starting point for something I was doing in my project. But then he was much less likely to help me going forward because, like, why would he want to do that? He's not just going to want to create projects for me for free. It's because I wasn't valuing his time. I didn't see it as a cost to him, especially if I'm valuing time based off of the amount of pay I'm getting per hour, which is much lower than what he was getting. Now, this is the way to think about it when you're asking for help from somebody. So you are getting something from somebody. But the same concept applies if you're trying to provide services for someone else. As whenever there's some service, it's not just a one-way thing, there's always an exchange. So you're providing services for someone's money. That's the way a job works. So if you are seeking a job and you get a no, first off, that's just going to happen sometimes. Not every job is a perfect fit. So even if you're the best developer in the world, you're still probably going to get some no's. But if you're regularly getting no's, then it's an issue of value. In other words, you are too expensive. And going off of that same approach that beginners tend to think of where it's purely dollars, they might say, okay, instead of making $200K a year, I'll be good with $50K a year. And maybe that's better. But what this idea does not account for is the time cost and the opportunity cost. If you're paying 50, hey, that's 50K you could pay to something else as well that might do better. So it's ultimately an issue of value, but here's a couple of other ways to think about it. If you're a newbie, there's going to be a lot of training required to get you up to speed. You might not see that as a big deal. Hey, it might only take a month or two of my time, big deal. But from the other person's perspective, the person hiring you, that could be a substantial amount of time, and their time is worth so much more than your time. These numbers are made up, but let's just say you're working for somebody who's making $1 million per year, and to help you, it's going to take a lot of their time. And because of that time cut, they're now only making $0.5 million a year. Hey, they saved $150K here, but they lost $500,000 here. That's the concept. The numbers, again, are made up. The idea is that you have to consider the time in any transaction. So here's a common thing. Hey, I will work for free. This might work for local organizations or churches or things like that. Maybe some friends who need some projects built. It could be a great way to get some experience. But the big problem with the idea of working for free when you're trying to get into more serious roles is that it pretty much assumes that there's no time cost. And now that I'm deeper into my career, I understand this so much better than when I first started. So much so that now I mentor people, and a common request that I get is, hey, will you allow me to join your mentorship program, and in exchange, I will work for free. So they don't want to pay the money for the mentorship program, and in exchange, I get their work. But they don't realize that their work is a massive time cost. So this is a paid mentorship thing, which you can do paid, or you can find someone who will help you out for free, whatever, doesn't matter to me. But for people who want to work with me, I offer them mentorship at a price. So in this situation, not only do I not make money from the mentoring, but I also have to invest my time into helping somebody who's brand new and needs the mentoring, has no idea what they're doing. So their offer to me is this. Hey, instead of me just paying for the mentorship program, how about you give that to me for free and you invest a lot of time in me? Basically double the cost to me, and I make $0 because the work that they're going to produce is probably not that valuable. That being said, I don't think this idea can never work. But if you can, do some of the work up front, or prove that your free work is valuable to somebody in some way. So here's an example. If you are a freelance developer, find someone who will allow you to work for them for free. Maybe it's a smaller company, a friend, or an organization that you know of. Maybe it's a website for your school or some club, and make this website really, really good, all right? So give it 200% effort, make it amazing. Then, as you find potential clients, you can say, hey, look what I built for this other company. I did it completely free. I'll do the same thing for you to build experience. Then, building on top of that, you collect enough of these success stories that you've basically built for free, you can start to charge money because there's proof that what you provide is worth something and that the time that someone invests in working with you is going to pay off. This will work pretty much the same way if you're not a freelance dev, but instead you're job searching. If you're new, you have to go above and beyond to show value, and ideally that means you might have some projects on your portfolio or some prior work you did for organizations. You're very responsive to interactions with recruiters. You show up to meetings on time. You don't waste anybody's time because that's the thing that they're judging you on. If you're not bringing a ton of experience and skills, they're measuring, is this person worth the investment of my time to get them from point A to point B where they're actually providing value to me. And here is the secret sauce where this idea can shine. If you get any kind of take home, man, this can be great. Some people hate these, and as you get deeper in your career, you can just say, hey, I don't do take homes. I'll just find a different job. But if you're a beginner and you're trying to find a role, you might get the opportunity to do some kind of take-home assignment. And this could be to build a feature, maybe to review some code, or describe how something works. It could be anything really. It could even be typical DSA stuff, and then you go and explain your solution. The difference between this kind of setup where you have a take-home assignment and a typical data structures and algorithms coding test is basically the take-home assignment. You can do it on your own time. You might have a time limit, but it's not something where you have 45 minutes and you have to run through the question and come up with a solution. Instead, you're given the opportunity to solve the problem over a longer period of time, which gives you the opportunity to work for free, essentially. And this is the big reason why take-homes are actually controversial, as there are plenty of companies that will basically take advantage of people trying to get jobs to get them to do free work, and then they'll actually take that code and use it in the product. Not suggesting you do that if you're a company. I think it's wrong, but just to be aware that is a problem. As a candidate, you might just have to ignore the fact that some companies do that and instead see it as an opportunity to show your value plus some. If you're a beginner, you might have a lack of skill and experience, and the take-homes allow you to compensate by putting in additional effort and time, and that time you invest is just going to help you learn more skills so you'll get better doing it. I can share a personal story where this idea worked for me. There was a company where I was going through the interview rounds for. I wasn't having a great experience. Their response times were slow, always taking much longer to get back to me when they say they would get back to me. There was a substantial number of interviews. Oftentimes the interviews felt off topic, or I was just thinking like, why am I even talking to this person? But that's how they wanted to do their interviews. Ultimately, it came to a take-home assignment. And at this point, I had done like 5 different interviews or something crazy. So I was like, whatever, I'm not going to give up now. I'm going to go through this take-home assignment. But just to make sure that I get the offer, even if I don't want to take it, because at this point I was pretty annoyed with the company. Now, I didn't make some overly complex solution. I basically did what they told me to do and then some extra surrounding things with documentation and some extra research on my end. I wanted to give a lot of effort to this because even if I got a no at the end of the interviewing, I wanted it to be 100% not possible for it to be from something I did. So basically, I wanted to give them full responsibility for any no's so I could confidently feel like, hey, I did everything I could do for this job. I just didn't get it for some other circumstances out of my control. So not only did I have to do this take-home assignment, I had to present it to a group of people running through the whole thing. So it was awful. So I prepped for this meeting, kind of went through some notes, came prepared. The meeting was with a number of people, and of all of those people, only one person actually showed up for the call. And the person that did show up was not the hiring manager, and they also did not have an immediate yes, no capability for my submission. So they were an accessory person to this process, but they weren't a direct decision maker. So obviously I felt frustrated that nobody showed up, but I was like, whatever, I'm just going to go through this as best as I can. So I ran through that. I had a whole write-up, a whole document, and I went through all of it end to end. It took me like probably a full hour. And by the end, the guy was like, wow, this is really, really good. if I had the ability to hire you, like I would hire you right now. So I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. So there's probably a good chance that he's going to give a positive word to whoever is in charge of hiring people. So ultimately I did get an offer and I did take the role, but just all of that story to show that I put in a lot of effort because I had the opportunity to work for free and show that I could provide a lot of value. The amount of value I did provide showed that it was worth them paying me the salary that they ended up offering me. So real quick, I want to wrap up this section because as you could probably tell, I put in a lot of effort to get that job. But I don't put that amount of effort into every job. And I see it as a funnel. Down here is a job offer. Up here is just connections and applying to jobs randomly on the internet. As we go farther down this funnel, the amount of effort I give goes up. So an example of this is, let's say I'm applying to some job A. I don't even read it, man. I just apply. Like, it's not worth my time to look at every single job and overanalyze it. I'm just going to apply. I'm going to do an effort to, maybe customize my resume a little bit, make sure it lines up with the job. But I'm not at this point considering if it's a company I would really want to work at. I just apply. Same with networking. I might connect with a recruiter. Don't really care what they're offering. I'm just looking for opportunities. And now let's say company A gets back to me. Oh, they might be interested in an interview. Now it's time for me to do a little bit of extra research, see if it's something I'd actually be interested in doing. Then we get through some interviews, starting to actually see that this could potentially turn into something valuable. Then by the end, I give full effort to close out that process and get an offer. This is the general approach that I would follow if I was to try to find a job right now. Now, the exception to this general approach is if there are specific companies and you're just really set on working at those companies, then you need to go full effort from the beginning. This is more of a bulk approach, reach out to lots of recruiters, apply to lots of jobs, and then, nurture the opportunities that start to pop up. This approach is very direct, where it's like, hey, we have a specific target, let's shoot for just that target. Both of these are very valuable and they do both work. There are a few scenarios in my career where there was a specific company or a specific thing that I was seeking out, and I was very careful to give it 100% effort from the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about learning, and I'm going to challenge you to learn things you don't understand. And this idea kind of sounds cool, but really it's just learning. Learning is figuring out something you don't understand already. If you already understood it, then you wouldn't be learning it, right? You would just be recalling it. But I feel there's like a natural instinct to avoid this, right? Because it's uncomfortable. When you don't understand something, it feels like you're not progressing. And it's very easy to just give up if you hear something you don't understand. Let's say you're watching a video and you already knew everything in it, you understood it all perfectly. Do you think that video would really be pushing you to get better? Probably not. It's probably better that you watch a video and maybe you understood 70% of it and there's 30% that you still have to do a little bit of extra searching and practicing. And oftentimes you might have this really scary concept that you're just avoiding, right? So let's just say for the sake of this video that the concept is functional programming. Maybe you've heard about it a bit, but you don't really understand what it is and how it's different. And anytime you hear that word, you kind of shy away and maybe get a little scared inside, cry a little bit. I'm going to challenge you, anytime you hear something that you don't know what it is, to spend the extra effort to not avoid it, but embrace it and learn it. And here's the crazy part. Often you will avoid something for such a long period of time. And when you sit down and you actually focus, turn off your phone, get off of social media for 2 seconds, and you actually try to understand a new concept, it might actually make sense. And then you never have to worry about that concept ever again. You have the idea in your head. If you do this for every new concept, it's going to happen much less frequently because you begin to have a much better understanding of everything around you. Think about if you wanted to read for the first time, right? You're going to have a bunch of words that you don't know the definitions of. So if you pause reading every time you hit one of those words, you do some research, figure out what that word is, try to memorize it, then go back to reading, you'll end up having to do that less and less, and you'll be able to read more and more advanced books. Same exact idea here. So when you hear new words, here is a way to kind of guess if you should spend time learning them. If you hear them multiple times and you have identified that it's a word you've heard before, but you still don't know what it is, then it might be time to do some additional research on it. I like to talk about a bunch of different topics, and I like to understand the high level of various things, but I often just ignore things if it's something I've never heard of. Honestly, I just don't have the time to be looking up everything, but if I hear something over and over again, then I'm like, oh yeah, this is important. So basically, we have a system where the important words bubble to the top. So, you might be hearing some of the buzzwords and you want to know about them. So that's a great place to start. All of the things you've heard of, but you don't know what they are. All of that stuff about learning is really just to encourage you to push through the challenges of learning and change the way you think about it. Learning can actually be a bit uncomfortable. Me planning videos, me solving bugs, and all the stuff I have to do takes a lot of effort and energy. It's not something that I just have up here ready to go. I've already put in a lot of effort to prepare the content. That's why these videos can be great, because basically I'm taking the pain of that effort and then arranging the material in such a way that can be easily consumed by you. But there are scenarios where you just need to get in there and figure things out. And I think a lot of people are just scared to do that. Another example of this is in the mentorship program, we have some group calls. I've had some people who are maybe newer come to me and say, hey, these group calls, I feel like they're a little bit too advanced. Should I not come to them? And my answer is no. That's one of the reasons you should come to them. Because you're surrounding yourself with people at this level. You're at this level. Well, naturally, if you spend enough time learning what they're teaching, you're going to get to that level. And this does work. The problem is that because you're at a beginner level, there are a lot of things that you may have not heard before, and it's a lot of new topics. So a 1 hour call might not be an hour where you fully understand everything. And you might need to write down some notes and spend extra time to get everything out of a 1 hour call because you're not at this level. But that's exactly what's going to help get you to that level, is doing the extra effort to understand everything in that 1 hour. So that's how I approach learning. If I'm doing a brand new topic, let's say it's a video course, I might watch 1 hour of content, but that takes me 4 hours to consume it. I watch the material, I practice, I do additional research, I take notes, I play on my phone for like an hour or two. No, I'm playing. I generally try to stay focused when I'm studying, and I would recommend you do that as well, because anytime you're getting distracted, it's just kind of preventing you from digesting new material. So those are just some general thoughts about learning and my approach. If you just accept the fact that learning might be uncomfortable, you are going to be able to get so much farther in your learning. And you'll find the things that maybe were once scary are actually not that bad. Now, this next point is really about focus. And last year, I released a mind map, which is a really great video, by the way, if you want to check it out. And this was a back-end engineering mind map. Basically, it showed a bunch of different topics that you should know about as a back-end engineer. And I think this is a lovely exercise because basically it gives you a really good 1,000-foot view of everything you should be aware of and how things fit into categories or how things are different between each other. The problem is, what I see is beginners will go to some structure like this and they'll just go through here and learn this and then learn this and then learn this and then learn this, and they're all over the place. There's no structure to how they are learning the material, and it's completely random. And they justify this by saying, oh, I'm getting a better understanding of the ecosystem, I'm becoming a better general developer. And while that might be true, that's not really what you need when you're brand new. At least not only that. That should only be a portion of your studies. So this discovery where you're just kind of looking at new technology, trying new things out, to me, this is something that should only be a portion of your total efforts. So what that portion is, it might just depend on your goals, but generally maybe a 30% out of 70. So let's say this is your effort. You could have 20 to 30% on discovery, where you can just think new. But this 70 to 80%, this is focused. This is what people are bad at, right? Nobody's good at this anymore. People say it's hard to get a job, and yeah, we have cycles. Maybe it is harder than it was at one point in the past, but that's irrelevant because I think the big problem a lot of people have is they're 100% in this discovery phase and they're not good at anything. They're just a full stack everything where they've basically split up their learning 1% across 100 different buckets. And as a result, hey, they might have a pretty good general knowledge and know a little bit about each topic, but they can't use it to build anything because they're a noob. So this could be something where, hey, maybe you just spend, the weekend kind of trying some new stuff. Or if you don't already have something assigned to that 1 hour a day that we've been talking about, this discovery is a great thing you can do for that 1 hour. And however this works best for you, you could comprehensively go through new topics, like I mentioned, data structures and algorithms or system design. Or each week you could try something new. So maybe you spend an hour a day learning a little bit about AI models. Then next week you explore functional programming. Then the next week you explore cloud services. And you're getting a really good broad understanding of technology, but it's really just a complement to your core skills, which is what you get really good at. So this might be back-end engineering. And that's where you follow more of a roadmap and a system of study to get really good at just a few technologies so you can actually build services. And that allows you to go deeper. So focus allows you to go deeper. And when you go deeper, it's easier to transfer those deep skills to other languages. So all of this discovery becomes easier. And that 20 to 30% can be way more effective because you're way more advanced in your abilities. All that to say, don't neglect that discovery. It's super important. If you don't do it, it's going to cripple you because you might be a really good back-end engineer, but then you go to the front end and you're like, I don't know what an HTML is. That's not going to work out. So you need to have a little bit of skills, especially in the surrounding topics to whatever your focus is. All right, let's talk about some more career stuff now. So the big thing I want to talk about in this video is that AI is not going to take your jobs. This is driving me crazy, the fact that everybody feels like, oh yeah, AI is going to take my job. First off, have you even used AI yet? It's awful. I can't get AI to do literally anything correct except very basic code or prototypes. So it's not nearly to the point of replacing really good developers. Now, could it get to that point? Well, I don't really know where AI is going to go, but what I believe is that if you're replaceable by AI, at least now or in the near future, then you're probably just really bad because AI cannot replace a human being who actually designs solutions for problems and is able to utilize resources to solve those problems. So I realistically think it's going to be the case that we utilize AI more to help us build solutions and kind of think about it as like automating some of the basic stuff. As of right now, anytime I utilize AI heavily in the development of some project, it usually actually slows me down. And this is because of a few things. First off, I don't understand the project. And when there's a bug, I don't know where to look because I basically just copy and pasted a ton of code from some AI. If you're just utilizing ChatGPT or Copilot and you're not really thinking, you're just copying and pasting, you're going to have the same issue where once there's a problem with the code, you don't understand the code well enough to actually fix the problem. So I think in many cases, AI is actually going to slow you down. Now, when it comes to learning, if you're skipping the learning process because of AI, then you're definitely going to get wrecked. I think AI is a great tool to explore different technologies, ask questions, and that's what I use it for. Almost like a sounding board to interact with a fake person, to ask for ideas, or to learn more information about different things. But very rarely do I just copy and paste a fully functional solution. So personally, I am not worried about AI replacing me. If anything, I think it'll change my day-to-day activity, and maybe that can elevate me to think more about solutions rather than code implementations. But I don't see that being a problem, and I don't see that being something that's going to replace me. So personally, I'm not worried about AI just completely destroying the computer science field realistically, I think it's just going to change the type of work we do. And this is the way we adapt, right? So this isn't a new concept. Throughout time, anytime there is innovation, it brings change to the type of work people do. I'm sure at some point when assembly lines started to become a thing, people were like, this is going to replace humans, like we're not going to have our jobs. But now there's people who have to put these assembly lines together, engineer them, maintain them. There's a change in the type of work. So I think that's more likely what's going to happen. And I think this is generally in line with the way you should be going in your career anyways, starting to think more about solutions instead of just small code samples or snippets that really don't provide value to the world. So that's what I want you to get to anyways. AI just might make that easier because it's basically able to automate that basic stuff and we can focus more on higher difficulty problems. Next up, I want to talk about networking. And I'm not talking about, switches and cables. We're talking about career networking, building connections with other people. That's what I want you to think of when we say networking. Networking is going to become even more important with the introduction of AI. It has already changed the way we get jobs and it's just going to continue to change. So throughout this process of job searching, your goal should be to talk to a human. So we want a human-to-human interaction. You ever call a company and they give you some phone menu and there's absolutely no way to talk to a human unless you go through like 14 different menus and it takes you 15 minutes? It's super frustrating, but that's basically a way to reduce the amount of people that they need to take phone calls. They've introduced some level of automation to filter out people, giving them automated phone options. Same idea here with AI. So AI is going to be used to auto screen and tell companies if they should give a follow-up interview for a certain candidate. So not only is AI going to be used for analyzing documents, but AI can actually be used for initial screenings. So there is a real chance if you're interviewing that for the initial interview, you're actually just going to talk to an AI. It's pretty dystopian, but that's just the reality that we're living in. So there's a scenario where you might not even get to talk to a person until you get to a technical interview. Heck, even those at some point might be conducted by an AI. I don't really know. The only thing I know is that when all of this happens, human-to-human interaction is going to go up in value. Human-to-human interaction is going to be key. So there's strategies that you can do to get human-to-human interaction. And the first is to just build connections. So before you're like, hey, can you give me a job? Just start connecting with people. Put it all in a central place. LinkedIn is a great place to do this. I personally believe LinkedIn can be very valuable if you use it correctly. So I connect with people I know, people I meet in person at events, people I connect with online. I try to bring them all to my central career hub, which would be my LinkedIn. So I have an extensive networking strategy. We can get into all the details of that another time. The high level thing to know here, do not underestimate the value of networking. This has pretty much gotten me every opportunity in my life. There has been some networking involved. So don't ignore this one. Now we can still go the other routes. We don't have to do networking. I just believe that networking is going to be the most effective. But if you're going the route of just applying to jobs and trying to get through the screening, there are various strategies you can apply to have a higher chance of success. So one is apply with an AI. So utilize an AI tool to apply for jobs. This one I'm not actually advocating for. I don't really think it's a good idea. But I'm just saying, if you do research, you will see people who have done this. And as a result, job openings are flooded with applicants because people are able to just mass apply to jobs with the use of automation and AI. So you might not even need AI for this. You might just be able to use some kind of automation. But the idea here is you're competing with a bunch of computer geeks that know how to do things automatically. So if there's an opportunity for them to game the system and apply to every job on planet Earth, they're probably going to find a way to do that. So you can join the enemy and do that yourself. Or what I would actually recommend as an alternative is to utilize AI. And this can be for custom resumes or for customizing cover letters or for finding certain keywords that you should target for a certain job, you can basically speed up your process of applying by utilizing AI to do some of that decision-making process for you. So that's probably what I would do. Next up, when it comes to job searching, I want you to keep in mind that it is a numbers game. Not only for you seeking out jobs, but also for a company seeking candidates. They might have 1,000 applicants and they need some way to filter that down to a few really good candidates. So you have to understand why they do some of this stuff in the first place. A company like Google, which gets, probably hundreds of thousands or millions of applicants, how in the world are they supposed to decide from that pool? They need some kind of standardized process, and that's why they have some level of automation probably, and then things like leak code challenges, system design challenges, and so forth. So their strategy is probably to get a really large number of candidates, and then on the back end of their hiring system, filter down to some really good options. We want to take that same approach, but from the other point of view when we're actually applying to jobs. So going back to the idea of a funnel, we want a lot of jobs up here, and then we want a few opportunities down here. And I think the problem is a lot of people underestimate this number here. People will commonly take the approach of the idea of a true love that you'll hear with relationships, and they apply it to job searching, where there's just this perfect job somewhere, and they have to search through life until they magically run into this job and everybody's happy. You can definitely focus on just a few companies trying to get into those, and I think that's great if that's what you want to do. But in general, I am more of the opinion that when it comes to jobs, there are plenty of fish in the sea. So instead of just seeing 1 or 2 jobs, see it as a bunch of openings everywhere. We have now a much higher chance of running into one of these. Then what we do is we just build up our skills and our career capital so that when one of these opportunities bites, we have what it takes to actually go all the way through with it and get an offer and take the job. So that's my general approach to this. But some people will just get a single no from one company and be highly discouraged. Or maybe it's 2, or maybe 3, or maybe 4, or maybe 5. They're starting to collect a bunch of no's. Or they reach out to 10 people trying to make some connections, and they don't really get much luck with the networking. I believe you need to think much bigger when it comes to numbers. So for example, if you reach out to 1,000 people to connect with them, start to build a connection, maybe these are recruiters, for example. Even if you only have, say, a 5% success rate to actually get on a call with a recruiter and discuss opportunities, that's still going to lead us to 50 calls with recruiters. And of those, maybe 10% of that actually lands you interviews, and then it's just a matter of getting an offer. So it's all a system of ratios, and I don't know what those exact ratios are going to be. It probably varies for you and every single person out there. But the idea is if this top number is not high enough, basically your outreach points, your touch points to recruiters or applied jobs, then you don't have enough numbers to make it down here. So if you're not getting enough offers, you can basically start here and work up to figure out what the problem is. If it was the case, let's just say in theory, you had 50 interviews and you had 0 offers, it's a problem with your interviewing skills. If instead, let's say we had 500 intro calls with recruiters, and this led us to having 5 technical interviews after, man, that's a problem with your social skills. You need to work on those calls, what you're talking about, and the value you're providing. So always bringing it back to what value you provide. And these are probably exaggerated numbers, but I think you get the idea. If instead we had 10,000 outreaches, bringing us down to 50 intro calls, well, heck, we have a problem with probably our profile, the things we're saying. Maybe our resume doesn't have enough experience or the type of people we're targeting is off. You can basically use this system to optimize every stage in that funnel to figure out where things go wrong. And because of this, I encourage people to keep track. Now, you don't want this to be some insane chore, but when I was job searching, I put a list of all the jobs I applied to. And then when it came to networking, I was on it following up with any conversations I had previously with recruiters. And I would reach out to people and make it a very active thing. You can go more strict and actually keep track of how many people you reach out to and all of that. But the idea here is if you're focusing on it, that area of focus is going to grow. It becomes a higher priority. So that's the big takeaway here. Start to keep track of how many jobs you're actually applying to, which ones they are, and how much networking you're actually doing. Most of the time when people say, oh, I'm not getting any offers, I ask them, well, how many interviews have you done? 3. Okay. How many jobs have you applied to? 100. I'm like, okay, yeah, the numbers aren't great, but if you applied to 1,000, realistically, you would have 30 interviews. And if you can't land an offer in 30 interviews, then man, you got to upskill. So the issues expose themselves as the amount grows. You can see where the problem is. So if you don't have enough numbers, you're not going to be able to identify where in that process you're failing. You might also be thinking that some of these big numbers can be intimidating. It'll take a lot of time. But if you take the approach of a little bit per day, it can really add up. So 10 jobs per day for a year, that's 3,650. That's just an example. Where if I told you to apply for 3,000 jobs, you'd be like, you're out of your mind. Well, what if I told you to do 10? That might take you 2 or 3 hours, and then do that every single day of the year. You're probably going to get something. Or do the same approach, but focus on networking. Connect with 10 people per day, send them a custom message, ask them about their work. After a year, you're going to have thousands of people for opportunities. Personally, that's the route I would go, but you just have to realize that as those numbers grow, the opportunities grow, and the chance of getting lucky increases because you're ready and you see way more opportunities to get lucky. Next up, when it comes to job searching, I want to encourage you to seek out more difficult roles and more niche roles. So even if you don't end up getting one of the more advanced roles, if you strive to build skills to that level, you're going to have a much easier time. But if you can land some of the more advanced roles, there's usually way less applicants. And you can see this for yourself. If you go to LinkedIn or some other website where it might tell you the number of applicants, and you look up something like a junior full stack role, it'll probably say something like 500 plus applicants or whatever it says. But you can then increase the difficulty, just have full stack. It's probably still going to be pretty high. Then you can have a senior full stack. The number of people that qualify for this is less. So if you can build the skills to get to this point, you're going to have a better time because there's less people to compete with. And I posted a job on LinkedIn one time. The amount of unqualified candidates was 90% of them. So even if a job says 500 applicants, the chances of all of them being capable of doing the job is pretty thin. Then you can start to get more specific. So this is just a small change from full stack to back end. Not a huge difference, but you get the idea. We're becoming more specific with our focus. This is a much more difficult and more focused role than this here. I follow this exercise and just out of curiosity, I searched staff Rust engineer and I found a role pretty quickly that had 23 apps. And I think that's just the number that actually click it. It doesn't even mean they fully applied. And it said 1 week ago. So, it's been sitting there for a week and had almost nobody apply to it. Now, I know what you're thinking, oh, I'm not just going to jump to staff level. I get that. That's not what I'm saying. The idea behind this is as you get more difficult or higher levels of seniority and you get more niche, the pool of applicants becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So, for example, some of my roles were in Web3, cryptography. So, finding people competent in zero knowledge cryptography, that's much more niche than a junior full stack developer. So this can be some specific technology or thing. It could also be an industry. So if say you're at this level and you're a full stack developer, well, hey, maybe you should target finance or some other industry where you can basically focus your skills to get better at that industry and stand out and basically compete against less people. The more niche you get, generally there's going to be less people qualified, and you can spend less time because it's very focused to get good at that topic. Now let's take a moment to talk about interviewing. So let's break this up into some categories here. So I might have an intro call or a formal screening. We might have data structures and algorithms. We might have applied coding where they might tell you to build some app or, show some example in React or whatever it might be. And there's probably system design as well. And then there's often behavioral. So let's go through each one of these briefly. So the intro or the screening, this is really just to make sure you're a potentially decent candidate. Kind of just, think of it as spending 15 minutes with you to hear a little bit about your background and your goals. Make sure you're not a psychopath. And if you're good to go, then we can move you on to the next rounds. When you're networking, this is the goal. Get an intro call with some recruiters. Basically tell them what you're looking for, or you could ask them what they're looking for, see if you can fit in some way. Just building connections. Data structures and algorithms, this is probably going to be some leak code style stuff. You generally want to practice that for bigger companies. The bigger the company, the more standardized interviewing there's going to be. So if you go into leak code, you can filter by company. If there's a certain company you're interviewing for, you can see what kinds of questions you might run into. There's also different leak code lists. So there's the leak code 75 and leak code 150. I really like the leak code 75 because it categorizes the questions by the types. So you'll have stuff on graphs, trees, linked lists, stacks, queues, heaps, all of the different topics, so you can get an idea of the categories of information you need to know. And I think that's really helpful. Now, as for applied, this really just depends on the company and the role. I can't tell you what kind of stuff you'll have to do, but these can be pretty intense. I did a 3-hour applied interview one time, and they basically just had me open a text editor and started to tell me to build certain things. These can be quite stressful, but it does give you an opportunity to show that you can actually code versus doing a bunch of random data structures and algorithm challenges. So this is probably going to be more common in medium-sized companies or smaller companies where they might not care as much about your ability to do certain data structures and algorithms. For all of these, I generally recommend you ask questions. So one might be, hey, can we use the internet, or do I have to have everything memorized? For an applied programming interview, you might just be able to email them and ask. It may be something also where you try your best and basically get as far as you can. And it's more of like a pair programming thing where the interviewer works with you to come up with a solution, or you do some research together, and it's not just them staring at you with no talking the entire time. Next up, we have system design, and this one's pretty fun because it's less coding and more talking about approaches to large-scale systems. So a question might be, hey, how would you handle billions of messages or trillions of messages in an app like Discord? There's a bunch of common scenarios, so as you start to study system design, you'll see some of those. So I've been working from the beginning through all of the essentials of system design, so I have a playlist on my channel if you want to check that out. The big thing for this is it's often open-ended, so you might just get a vague question like, hey, I need you to build an instant messaging app. And your job is to actually ask more questions to figure out what the requirements for that app are. How many users are there going to be? Does this need to be highly available 24/7? Does this need encryption? Those kinds of things. And based on the responses, it could change the answer you give. But this is pretty interactive where you go back and forth. Again, kind of like pair programming, but you're not actually programming, you might be designing. So you could be drawing it on a whiteboard or using some online software to make diagrams. Next up, we have behavioral, and this is usually about different scenarios you've been in your career or how you might handle certain things. So this really gets into some of your leadership capabilities. This can be especially important if you're getting into higher up roles where you're not just an entry-level independent contributor. You might be a senior or a staff engineer where some of that leadership skill is a lot more important. Do not dismiss this or think it's going to be super easy. These can get pretty tough. Realistically, there are a variety of behavioral questions that you could prepare answers for ahead of time. So you can look up some of the most common behavioral interview questions and just kind of think of some basic stories that showcase your approach to solving problems. So definitely important, don't dismiss it, but this is something that's more personal and less code related. So maybe not as technical, but still very important, especially when it comes to deciding what level of seniority you're going to have. So this could be something that could determine what band of pay you're in, for example. All right, that pretty much sums up everything I want to go in this video. I know it's overwhelming, but I think the biggest thing for you is to not wait Start on this immediately. As you know by now, you can make tremendous progress with a little bit of effort over time, so there's no excuse to not start right away. You don't have to wait till some perfect moment in the future for you to start learning code. There's really no excuse for you to not get a little bit better each day. I think a common problem is that people assume they'll be better at something or more able to take something on in the future, but they just keep saying that, and that future never comes. So I'm challenging you, whatever you know you need to do, make that choice right now and don't just start it at some arbitrary point in the future. It's not going to be any different then, so you might as well start now. And I'm saying this because I've made this mistake myself. I've been thinking about a software as a service idea for a year or two, and I was like really ready to start, and then I waited, and then I was really ready to start, and I've just been going back and forth. Well, I just decided, hey, today is the day I'm starting it, and I just opened up my computer, started working on it, and I'm continually working on it. So that's a big goal of mine for the year, but I feel like I could be so much farther in that journey if I started when I knew I was supposed to. So I just wanted to offer that warning to you. Don't let time pass on your goals. Just decide to start and do it. Now, if you've benefited from this material and you understand my approach and you want to work more closely with me, I do offer one-on-one mentoring. So I'll leave a link for that down below, but that's a system where you can get direct guidance from me to go from where you are currently to reaching your goals and achieving much more in your software development career. So again, I'll leave a link for that down below. Would love to see if you're a good fit for the program. Aside from that, let me know if you've enjoyed this video. If you do, definitely send it to a friend that you think would benefit from it. I don't typically do this style of content, so trying something new here. If you want more of this, as well as deep dives of different topics, be sure to check out my channel and stay in touch with me on the various social medias. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.